Hi, my name is William Kuss, and this is for Sociology 348, Chapter 5, The Rational Choice Perspective. It centers on human rationality regarding substance use, and substance users. Sources of inspiration for this perspective is the classical school of criminology, an essay on crimes and punishments by Cesare Bessaria, 1764. Talks about humans as rational hedonists who want to maximize pleasure and minimize pain. Punishment must be greater than the pleasure to have an effect. Jeremy Bentham spoke about utilitarianism, actions calculated to produce advantage, pleasure, and happiness, and avoid pain. Laws should produce happiness for the majority. Punishment should only be used when the gain outweighs the evil it creates. Examples: the Eighth Amendment of the United States Constitution against cruel and unusual punishment, the French Penal Code of 1791, and the Panopticon. Thinking About Crime by James Q. Wilson talks about deterrence and incarceration. It's neither wicked or innocent, but rationally watchful, dissembling, and calculating. The contemporary rational choice perspective. It's a choice based on personal or situational factors, the needs of a person, and their evaluation of the success. The practical ways to deal with rational choice criminals would be to increase the efforts of the visible deterrence, better security, increased perceived risks, reduction of rewards, as well as inducing guilt and shame. The general deterrence and also specific deterrences. Things like certainty, severity, and celerity. The certainty is that you know it's going to happen. The severity is how much of a punishment there'll be, and the celerity is how fast that the punishment is done. For example, when people are on death row, but they spend the whole time waiting for their trial to happen or the punishment to happen, then it's not really as much of a deterrent as it's supposed to be. There's also incapacitation as a way to deal with criminals. Things like incarceration. But incarceration causes a lot of problems, such as just creating large prison populations. And large prisons, or any prison, is expensive to maintain. And then also, when you start incarcerating people, you get a lot of people who get incarcerated for a very long time and may not necessarily deserve it. They get unfair sentences. And prison is also very well known for creating better and more hardened criminals, especially as the jails and prisons get more crowded. And then the problem also with incapacitation is that there's always new people to replace the people that were incarcerated. And substance use and abuse. Drugs are a rational choice. or the drug of choice of someone is chosen by them because it depends on each person's individual personality what kind of drug they like taking the most. The brain rewards the use of the drug. The substance use and abuse changes depending on the individual. So it definitely seems like a choice. The environment can have a lot to do with what drug someone chooses. And there's also many other different factors that can make it seem to factor in to a person's choice. The theoretical framework. The substance use as a choice. It implies that the options available are decided by the choice maker, the user. Substance use as a choice involves free will, but not necessarily rational, because drug use causes a lot of problems. It doesn't always seem like a rational choice. But then there's relative rationalism. There's also absolute rationality, natural selection, the human organism as a rational entity, and free will. And then there's the concrete interests from pleasure, performance, public impression, status, personal health, self-care, social participation, and peer pressure, as well as the environmental influence. The theoretical image. Some factors that affect choice. The physiological. It makes a person feel better. It has a physical reaction. Painkillers can lessen pain, or psychedelics can cause a different experience, but that's also the psychological experience. It makes someone feel better. And there's also like psychological withdrawal as well as physiological withdrawal. And then you have the sociological. The sociological is that sometimes people feel pressure, peer pressure to use drugs, or sometimes they feel peer pressure not to use drugs. So what are you going to do? And then substance use as a choice. It does fulfill needs. A person does choose the substance. A person chooses to use or not to use. Society also chooses and defines drug usage on a whole as a society, as far as like what drugs are acceptable, what drugs aren't acceptable, and how it's viewed within the society. Substances have been used historically in society for as long as societies existed. And there's also been a historical knowledge or ignorance of drugs. A lot of what society deems a drug is a lot of times due to ignorance of what drugs do. And sometimes too much knowledge is not good either, because then people are more likely to use it if it's less mystified in some ways. The theoretical components. The human body as a selective entity. It does take or reject substances. The body builds up tolerance. The human body is naturally rational. That's the only way it survives, is by taking in air, taking out air, and converting substances into different substances inside the body. And the body is affected positively by a lot of drugs. And that creates the choice, things that help people make choices. Another theoretical component is free will. It's kind of this mystified driver of life. We don't really know exactly what it is, but it's there. It is a demonstration of the will is when you choose to use or not use. And what is the purpose of free will? Is it to feel pleasure? Is it to avoid pain? Is it a moral issue? We don't really know. It's really ambiguous and subjective of what free will actually is. Then you have the rationality and criterion. Rationality guides choices. It uses intelligence and intellectuality rather than emotion and instinct. Rational decisions are based on circumstance. They serve a personal interest. Rational choices can be seen as planning, prioritizing, following logic, being methodical, calculating cost and benefit, and weighing means and ends, relying upon facts, and being instrumental. Relative rationality, on the other hand, actually let's do absolute rationality refers to a universal rationality that infers that rationality is an absolute existence, that rationality just exists. And then relative rationality, on the other hand, centers on the particularity of rationality in the human sphere. As an act, a thought, or an event is rational only to specific references under specific contexts in specific time. So rationality changes based on the different in the context. And then rationality can also be anchored to different bases, like goals, traditions, values, or affection. The social influence. People make choices under social and cultural constraints. Social influences figure in the individual choice of substance and substance use. Rationality under addiction. Rationality changes, or it's a universal state or principle. But depending on what stage of addiction you're in, your ability to think rationally or what a rational decision is to you changes. Theoretical applications. In the abstract, substance is a part of nature. Substance use is a human act, and substance users are living agents. In the concrete is that substances are an object. It is a physical object and exists. There are also empirical tests. You have case studies, historical analysis, survey research, and experimental studies. Then you have the policy implications. You have the public health, which is involved in treatment and prevention. You have social control, which is non-reflective, like they just control it without any rhyme or reason. And then you have the reflective, where they actually maybe take into consideration the individual. You have the life and community. Drug use is intertwined with life and community, whether it's rebellion or being a part of. Then you have the work in organizations. And then the work in organization is also an entity, and they can choose to punish or support drug use. And in summary, substance use is chosen for use or control due to effects on the human body and mind, the personal needs and social conventions. It is a choice made by the subject, and rational or irrational choice is subjective. And reflectively, rational and irrational intervention can make a big difference on the rational choices of the user. But ultimately, substance users make the choice to change. Thank you.